Hello, and welcome to today's live show where we're discussing how you can increase diversity representation in your organization. As always, we are joined by our resident expert. She has provided hundreds of organizations consultancy and training on diversity, equity, and inclusion, including many of our clients. She is a diversity dynamo. It's Baljit Kaur.
Oh,
Welcome to
wow,
the show.
Lee. Thank you very much, Lee. Pleasure to be here again with you and
Pleasure to
Kirsty.
have you. And we also have our MC extraordinaire. She is the embodiment of charisma, charm, and wit. It's Kirsty Ames.
Oh my goodness, Lee, thank you. It's not even my birthday. Thank you very much. Yes, I will be here and I will be monitoring any questions or anything that you guys have. So come and chat to me in the comments and I'll bring them up to Baljit and Lee as we go through.
Thank you, Kirsty. So, Baljit, everyone knows that diversity representation is not where it should be. Energy is very white and very male at the top table. It's the same across other industries. Why might that be?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, agree, Lee. This is very typical of most sectors and most industry. The path to leadership is less well trodden for certain demographic groups. There are certain social identity groups or demographic groups who are underrepresented at that top table. And the reason for that is primarily because that talent is often underestimated in an organization. So when I talk about being underestimated in an organization, what we're referring to there is a series of systemic and structural barriers that exist within most organizations, unless an organization has made that concerted, sustained effort to actually remove some of these barriers. But most of the time, these barriers do exist in organizations. So that underestimation of talent is through a number of things, but things like, the biases and the stereotypes that exist in our organization. We see merit defined in a certain in a particular way, but merit for different individuals and different social groups does manifest itself differently. So those biases and stereotypes are a barrier. There is an issue about this exclusion from networks, be they formal or informal networks, and generally speaking, certain social identity groups have been excluded, don't have that access historically to those networks, which means that they don't elevate up this career ladder as fast as perhaps others do. There's this issue around, we do hold sometimes certain individuals that belong to demographic groups to a higher standard. So there's lots of research from different industries and sectors in this space. But the research I'm going to quote, which is really, really powerful, is in the financial services sector. And this is not typical to that sector alone. But in the financial services sector, we do talk about this research that suggests that people from lower socioeconomic groups take 25% longer to progress in that organization, all other things being equal. And if you're Black from that particular group, it takes 32% times longer to progress. So, everything else is equal. The talent, the circumstances, the environment, the criteria, everything else is equal in those situations. So there's a real disparity here. And then the last thing I quickly want to mention is this process of internalization. People from certain social identity groups are not very quick to put their hand up. It's that sort of notion that my work will speak for itself. So therefore they almost get overlooked. I might not want to boast about my or rather showcase and talk about my achievements in this space because I will be perceived in my mind as being boastful, and I wouldn't want that kind of a reputation. So generally speaking, I won't put my foot forward until I've checked all the boxes in this space. So a number of systemic and structural factors.
Interesting. Thank you, Baljit. So, yes, systemic barriers and biases is that internalization that I guess prevents people from doing that upward management piece in terms of going further up. And I think there's evidence as well. I know that I think it was Powerful Women, correct me if I'm wrong, that did some research that there's women that are dropping out midway through their career. And I think part of that is because they can't see perhaps opportunities above them. Interesting. So, Baljit, one way of increasing diversity representation is this idea of sponsorship. What exactly is that and how does it work?
So sponsorship is primarily, in my mind, advocacy. It's when somebody who has greater power and influence than yourself, and certainly that power and influence in the organization, is able to advocate for you. So that might look like a mixture of being able to open doors that previously you found have been closed for you. It might well be around expanding the network of people that you are connected to. It might be around endorsing you publicly at meetings and events, and board exec level. You're getting that visibility and that endorsement. So it could be a number of those things. Putting you forward for those sort of stretch opportunities in the organization. All of those kinds of things are what sponsorship is about. And the idea here is that, this is beyond mentorship. So we have, I always say there's two types of sort of sponsorship. There's a pseudo sponsorship, and then there's a true sponsorship. The pseudo sponsorship is very much around giving somebody that support and that guidance, identifying their weak spots, giving them that career advice. That's that pseudo sponsorship. And that's what a sponsor also needs to do. But what a true sponsor needs to do is to ensure that they're advocating vigorously for this individual. They're almost going out on a limb for this individual. So there's some risk taking involved in this process of true sponsorship. And it's almost that sort of, helping you to manage your professional and your personal brand at work. We do know when it comes to those certain social identity groups that they are often over-mentored and under-sponsored. We know, for example, 1 in 4 men have sponsors. We know 1 in 8 women have sponsors. But when it comes to those social identity groups that are normally minorities in your organization in terms of the numbers of people, those minority groups, it becomes 1 in 20. We also know that those individuals from those social identity groups, they are very quick to sponsor, but they are not so quick to actually ask for sponsorship. So there's a huge, inequity in the entire process, which is kind of built in. So sponsorship is the key intervention that really makes a difference in organizations in terms of accelerating and elevating those individuals to, higher positions.
Thanks, Baljit. So it's going beyond mentoring and coaching. So it's, making intros, opening doors, helping them be more visible. That's going to allow them to have that upward trajectory. Thank you. Kirsty, I don't believe we've had any questions so far.
No, we haven't. We are about to move on to a really interesting section that I know of. So if you do have any questions, just pop them in the comments and I'll be sure to bring them up with Baljit or Lee.
Thank you, Kirsty. So, Baljit, how do you go about setting up a sponsorship program and what are your top tips?
Okay, so big question, Lee, very big question. I'm going to try and sort of distill it to sort of 3 key areas, but bear in mind there is a lot involved in terms of setting up a program. Now, first of all, the program needs to be very specific to an organization. There is no one size fits all. So there's no single approach. Every organization needs to keep things proportionate to their scale, to their context, to their culture, and what their overall goals are in this space. But generally speaking, there needs to be some structure to a sponsorship program, be it a formal process, be it a semi-formal process, or be it organic in the organization. And organic is where people are sort of free to identify and match themselves with sponsors in the organization. And the organization has not a lot of involvement in that process. So whatever it is that works for your organization, we still need to ensure that there is some structure involved here. There needs to be, in the least, some guidelines, for people to know what this sponsorship program is about and how to participate and what the various roles and responsibilities are. The danger is if we don't provide structure and guidelines and we keep it too flexible, the likelihood is that the underrepresented groups will be excluded from that process, because historically that is exactly what has happened. So if we leave it to the mercy of the organization, individuals then are subject to those opaque processes that exist in most organizations. So we absolutely do need some structure in this space. We need to ensure that, we're very much data evidence led. This isn't about jumping on the bandwagon. This is making sure that it's right for your organization. So you're getting that buy-in and you're getting that narrative to say why this is important, the reasons why you're doing it.
And when you say data led, so what do you mean by that? Is it perhaps setting some targets and then measuring diversity stats?
Yeah, absolutely. You can set some targets. So this is because your overall goal, if you're talking about targets, Lee, yeah, absolutely overall, you can set some, say, representation targets for your organization. And sponsorship will be one means of getting there, not the only means, but it is a key intervention. In the organizations that I've worked with, where I supported organizations in this space, it's been the game changer. It's been that key difference maker. So this is really important, but it's not the only solution.
Okay, and I guess as you've said, you've got to be realistic. You can't, if you're an SME business, you can't go and do what a big six is doing. So I think you've got to be realistic what you can and can't do, and presumably it kind of evolves over time.
Yeah, absolutely. You sort of, what is it? You live and learn in that process. What's worked, what hasn't worked, what we need to tweak, how you need to change things as you go along. So it's a live process, which is why guidelines are better than that rigid structure. Always keep it flexible, because we're dealing with people at the end of the day. No one person is going to be, sort of the same as another. We're dealing with complex, very nuanced individuals. So everything has got to be bespoke to the organization and to the individuals within that organization. And when we talk about data, it's not just that numerical data, it's that qualitative data as well. So how are you, consulting your workforce in terms of what might be the barriers that might be at play when it comes to, promotion? I mean, do we ask that question around, is anybody advocating for you in this workplace? That's a really great question, for somebody to start to reflect, actually, could I do with, some support in this area, because I'm finding it really difficult to build networks and relationships, or I'm not as visible despite all the hard work I do. So it just kind of prompts that kind of thinking. So data could be on a number of levels there.
Got it. Good. Okay. Excellent. And I think in the warm-up we talked about being clear on your why as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're building up a sponsorship program, we need to be very clear on roles and responsibilities. So for the sponsee, what I always say is absolutely be clear on your why. Because something's available to you in the organization doesn't mean it's the right strategy for you. So this is about understanding why sponsorship might be beneficial to you. Because if we get this right at the outset, we're very clear on what the objectives are for that individual, as well as the organization, but for that individual, what might be the outcomes, because this has always got to be an outcome focused program. So what are the outcomes you are looking to seek? And are they actually going to add value to you in terms of your personal growth as well as the organization?
So just to be clear, so this, I'm sponsoring the sponsee and it's their why.
Their why, yes. Yeah, because I always say in sponsorship programs, this is the people in the driving seat are the sponsees. The sponsors can make themselves available, to support individuals, and the organization kind of manage that process. But I think what's really fundamental in terms of, ensuring that there is going to be a high success rate is the sponsee really tapping into their why. Why is this important for me? Is it a lateral move I want to make? Is it visibility? Is it networking? Is it a promotion that I'm after in the organization? Do I want to be the chief exec in 10 years time, whenever that might be? So being very clear on your why, and that's tapping into your values, that's tapping into your career goals, all of those, that's you understanding in 5-10 years time, where do you want to be? So absolutely being clear on that, because sometimes I've been in organizations where some sponsees have joined, they've not necessarily been clear on the why. They've kind of had this vague idea, as it seems like a good project and it'd be great for me and I'd love to earn some more money. And it's that kind of very nebulous criteria. So
they need to be really motivated to do this, don't they? Otherwise it's going to be a waste of everyone's time.
And that point, Lee, waste of everyone's time, there's going to be investment here. For me, the sponsee is in the driving seat. Yeah, the organization can put the infrastructure in place, but the sponsee is in the driving seat. Once they understand their why, they've got to drive this process. Yeah, they've got to say, they've got to manage almost their career ambitions in this space. They've got to amplify what they do well. What are their achievements in this space? All, shout out about those things. They're going to have to invest time and energy. Yeah, and sometimes when the sponsee isn't clear on those things, then what we find is, they either fall out of the process or it hasn't been successful at the end of it.
Should there be an assessment of the sponsee's motivations? Because you're going to have limited time, limited sponsors. You want to make sure that if you are going to invest your time, they are, really motivated to do this. Is that something you would recommend?
Yeah, so I would say highly recommend, because I would say as part of those conversations you have in terms of when you're doing your performance, management and performance appraisal type conversations, that's when this career conversation needs to happen. So I refer to it as a sort of almost a separate but integrated career conversation. How skilled are we with in terms of having those career conversations with every member of our organization? That's a skill set we need. So your point, Lee, in terms of do those conversations need to happen? Yes, they need to happen, and they need to happen on an ongoing basis. What we need to be clear on is the why, the what. We need to understand what the objectives for this individual are. What is that development plan looking like? And then what are the tools and strategies that individual requires? When we talk about having those career conversations, there's another sort of big area that needs to be dealt with. Whenever you're launching any kind of sponsorship scheme or program in the organization, we need to make sure that the organization has a skill set. So if I work with an organization in this area of sponsorship, I want to ensure they've got all the prerequisites in place. So are the leaders and those sponsors able to have those coaching conversations? Do they have those coaching skills? Do they know how to provide feedback and challenge as well as receive feedback? Do they know what a career conversation looks like? Do they know how biases can manifest in that entire process and how to manage those? So sponsorship sits within a really proactive, inclusive space.
Fantastic. Okay, so we talked about the sponsee having the right motivation, that they know their why, and it's also important that you've got the best sponsor, presumably, as well.
So the sponsor, absolutely. Sponsor has got to be the best person for the role. So if it's a structured, formal, organized program in the organization, then the organization will have done some in-depth profiling of, which people are willing and able to sponsor individuals in the organization. And for me, it's about having that. There's two elements, really. It's about having the skill set. So sometimes, when we say, how do we identify sponsors? We say, should it be somebody that belongs to my demographic group, for example, because they'll understand my lived experience and all the roadblocks that I've had to encounter? Or should it be a white male? Or should it be a female? What are my chances of success if I go with a male sponsor versus a female sponsor? So my ultimate here would be for organizations to identify who the best person for that particular role is. They'll have a group of people in the organization, no doubt, that are able to become sponsors. But when you're looking to match individuals, who's the best fit for that particular position? So that would be the skill set. That would be about work styles. That would be about communication styles. That would be about how much power and influence this sponsor has in the organization. Because I need people to do all the things we said earlier, open doors and create opportunities and expand my network. I mean, that's all, really heavy stuff. So this sponsor's got to have the resources and the connections and the influence in the organization in order to facilitate that. So there's a skill set side of things. And then there's something which we call relational authenticity in this space. So, is there trust and honesty and integrity involved with both the sponsor and the sponsee in order for this relationship to work? Because this is a relationship, it is going to be a two-way street. We need to make sure that some of those attributes absolutely exist and are displayed by both sponsee and sponsor.
I think the ideal is to have someone that is has similar characteristics of the sponsee, because so often I hear from females that I'm the only female around the leadership table, and that can be actually quite intimidating. So to prepare someone at the sponsee for those experiences, a white male is not necessarily going to pick up on those things, are they? And then I think, relevance, if you have a finance business partner that wants to be a CFO, there's those technical things, experience that, a sales and marketing director is not going to know, are they? So I think relevancy, ideally, best practice is going to really help that.
Yeah, absolutely. That skill set, that experience. So if I want to go into a STEM field and I am not working in that department at all, how do the best sponsor for me would somebody who would have that kind of experience. And that experience could look very different for different things that I want. Sometimes I might want somebody with that technical experience and expertise. Sometimes it might be somebody who simply has the knowledge as to how to navigate the internal politics of this organization, how to position myself. It could be that kind of sponsorship that I want. Or it could be somebody that's, I'm looking to actually leave the organization, but I want to put myself in the best position. How can the organization support me to do so? In which case, this is somebody who's got those market insights. So your sponsorship could look very different depending on your why and your what.
I think that's a really good point, particularly in relation to big corporates. You need to be able to manage your stakeholders, I think, in order to progress to those senior roles. So I think that's a really good point. And I think perhaps another tip, perhaps something that organizations should do is to perhaps define their organizational goals from a diversity perspective. Is that quite key as well in terms of setting something like this up?
So are we, sorry, Lee, are we talking about those overall
diversity
goals?
Yes, to diversity specifically.
Yes.
What are our diversity organizational goals?
Yeah, absolutely. So we need to be clear. An organization absolutely needs to be clear. If you're going to spend the time, the money, the energy into this, you need to be clear how this is aligned to delivering your overall business goals. So that just makes good sense, doesn't it? Business sense, really. Yeah. So doing that, so there's growth for the organization and there's growth for the individual. So we're absolutely being clear on those goals, being very clear at the outset what these overall objectives and the metrics are going to be. How are you going to measure success in this area, and what are the outcomes, in this space? So there's got to be no vagueness there whatsoever. We've got to be absolutely crystal clear as to what we want to achieve. And I think leaders have a key role in this as to how leaders actually go about sponsoring, this entire program, whatever that program looks like, fit for purpose for your organization. It's almost this expectation. So earlier on, I said, sponsors have got to be willing and able. Absolutely. That's a great start. But with our leaders, there's almost that sort of higher expectation, really. We want them to be accountable in this space. This got to be, if this is seen as a strategic imperative to the organization, then it's a leadership accountability. We need to kind of hardwire it into their performance assessment. And we need to reward our leaders accordingly. That doesn't necessarily mean financial rewards. Rewards could happen in all sorts of ways.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Baljit. I think you've given us some really good practical tips to set people up for success if they're going to do this. So, structured sponsorship program, the sponsor needs to be clear on their why, and then the best sponsor for the role. And then I think you mentioned earlier that actually there's been some quite transformational impacts that you've seen as a result of that. So what can people expect if they were to do this in terms of some of the benefits?
So I can only talk from the organizations that I work with in terms of, because that's live. I've seen it happen, in front of me. So there has been resource and energy and investment, absolutely. And you scale that, you keep it proportionate to your goals and to your organization, etc., as we've already said. But what we are experiencing with organizations that are authentic in this space, really do want to make a difference, is we definitely have individuals that have gone through that program saying that they can definitely identify that personal growth. That personal growth may not be as tangible as I have secured a promotion. It could be just through those stretch opportunities, through, being able to run a meeting, an important meeting, could be in terms of delivering that key presentation, all of which hopefully the sponsor has facilitated for this individual, or got involved in some kind of project in the organization, whatever that might look like. So tangible benefits, absolutely, because this is, after all, what we are aiming for here. We're aiming for representation at those senior levels to shift. So that's where we need to monitor. Is this actually bringing those promotions, into play? Is it, improving those career outcomes, even in terms of money? Like, are people improving their, pay packages almost as a result of this? Because ultimately, those are the hard goals that the organization needs to set. But within that, there will be some of those other goals, which are also very important. So through that, running that meeting, through, delivering that key presentation, whatever it might be, I've been able to develop greater confidence. I now am able to speak up more confidently. Yeah, I'm able to put my hand up, because remember, this is one of the key problems we have: people not being willing to put their hand up until they've checked all the boxes. So, you know, now I know that, hang on, I don't need to be perfect. I can actually put my hand up and say, hey, you know, I would like to do this, or I have an opinion, you know, to share with the organization, whatever that is. So in a number of ways, that personal growth actually manifests. And then there's the organizational growth in terms of, you know, better outcomes. We know that diverse perspectives are very beneficial for organizations. So actually monitoring, you know, how you get that diversity of thought in the organization, which is benefiting your organization in terms of its wider goals.
Thanks, Baljit. I think you're tapping into a talent pool that potentially that you didn't even know about within these big corporates, you know, and I think what we see is that the best talent are thinking about their next move every 2 to 3 years, whether that's internal or external. And if they can't see the opportunities internally, they're going to go elsewhere.
Absolutely.
So you're going to retain your staff, aren't you? Fantastic. Brilliant. So as we head towards the end of our show, Baljit, what would be your #1 top tip to increase diversity representation?
Okay, this is a difficult one because it's kind of narrowing it down to the one thing. So I would actually say be very clear. When you're, you know, that structure I spoke about, it's very easy to say the words, you know, structure and guidelines, but be very clear at the outset. The reason why we see those failed relationships, the reason why we see, you know, the programs not returning the goals, not providing that return on investment in terms of achieving those goals, is because we haven't had the clarity. If we set people up for success, and if we set the program up for success, we are likely to achieve success. So being very clear as to what those guidelines are, that training that I spoke to, you know, the prerequisites I spoke about, being very clear on the role of the sponsee and the role of the sponsor, being clear on what the profiles look like in terms of those good matches. You know, there is quite a bit of intricate work that needs to take place in order to ensure success going forward, and not just hoping and wishing that we've just matched 2 people together and hopefully, you know, something magical will happen.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lee, unfortunately, we have come towards the end of the show now. So I'm going to thank everyone in a second. But Lee, before then, should we talk about the next show that we're going to be running? Because we are taking August off, aren't we? But then we have a spectacular guest lined up.
Oh my God, I can't believe I've secured this individual. It's me. I'm the special guest.
Yes, you are indeed.
September the 19th. So, a real bugbear of mine is that we have so many executives that ask us to help them find their next role. The reality is that we can't help most people because we're very client-led. So the next show will be about how you can proactively find your next role without needing recruiters.
Oh, and I'm very excited to get you in the hotspot as well. So please come and please grill him. I will be sure to bring all the questions up to Lee. So thank you very much. But I would definitely like to say a huge thank you to Baljit today, who has offered for today's show a lot of value. Now, Baljit, if people have been watching today and they're thinking, like, you're talking a lot of sense, but I've got a couple of questions, is the best thing for them to do to just connect with you on LinkedIn?
Absolutely. LinkedIn is the best place. You know, I'm always sort of on LinkedIn, so please do message me. I'm always posting my, you know, LinkedIn live shows and webinars on there, so you'll have other opportunities to engage with me. And should anybody have any further questions, I do offer a 20-minute session where you can just touch base with me and, you know, we can talk through challenges and strategies and all of those kinds of things.
Fantastic. And for anybody who's watching this recording on YouTube or on LinkedIn, I'll make sure that Baljit's details are really clear to find her profile for you. Okay, so Lee, it is about the end of the show. Do you want to thank everyone and lead us out?
Well, so thank you, viewers, for attending our show. Thank you to the charming Kirsty Ames, and thank you to the Diversity Dynamo, Baljit Kaur. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.